Name is Emek Ergun, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am an associate professor of women's and gender studies and global studies at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. I'm a feminist researcher, feminist teacher, and a feminist translator. So I had my bachelor's degree in translation studies at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul, Turkey. And I first became involved in the feminist movement when I was in college, mostly thanks to my great older sister, who is a renowned feminist activist in Turkey. After college, I came to the US to get a master's degree in women's and gender studies. As I was doing that at Towson University in Maryland, I was also grappling with some emotional difficulties of transnational traveling, displacement, living in a new environment. And although I was in a women's studies department surrounded by wonderful feminists, I was feeling isolated and cut off from the feminist movement. At that time, I started doing translations for a famous feminist periodical in Turkey. My sister was involved in that. And I realized that translation enabled me to stay in touch with the feminist movement in Turkey, despite all the great geographic distance. It was around that time that I started thinking more seriously about the political role of translation in facilitating cross-border dialogues and travels of feminist stories, knowledges, and theories. And I decided to study that role in my PhD, which I pursued in an interdisciplinary doctoral program called Language, Literacy, and Culture at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, aka UMBC. At UMBC, I worked with wonderful feminist scholars from various disciplinary backgrounds who helped me develop an immensely interdisciplinary, intersectional, and transnational approach to the study of feminist politics and ethics of translation. I also became a feminist professor there under the guidance of my amazing mentor, Professor Carol McCann. So in short, my personal journey as a feminist traveling from Turkey to the US and my encounters with feminists from all around the world shaped my intellectual journey as well as a transnational feminist studies scholar and a feminist translator and teacher. In my research, I explored the role of translation in fostering cross-border solidarities among feminist activists located in different geographies. So my work conceives translation as local and global activism. And my recently published book, Virgin Crossing Borders, that came out of University of Illinois Press, it presents such a case of translational activism. If following the Turkish translation of a feminist book, Hannah Blank's Virgin, the Untouched History, my book illustrates how politically empowering cross-border dialogues can be achieved in translation by enabling critical conversations on how to ethically connect across borders and how to live together in our differences, which requires translation in our multilingual world. I hope that my book will contribute to our understandings of global solidarity, diversity, and unity. So as I just mentioned, I am a feminist translator. So I translate, I study translation, all of that. And translation is feminist activism for me because translation expands the reach of our feminist theories and stories, and it facilitates connections among feminists located in different localities and speaking different languages. My most recent translation project is a great example of this, I think. And so in the last year, I became part of a translation collective that translated into English a book called The Purple Color of Kurdish Politics, which was edited by Kurdish journalist and politician Gültan Kışanak. A former member of the parliament in Turkey, Kışanak was elected co-mayor of Diyarbakır in Turkey in 2014. 2 years later, the Turkish state arrested and imprisoned her, along with numerous other elected Kurdish politicians, many of whom were women. And while behind bars, she wrote about her experiences about being a woman politician, Kurdish politician in Turkey. And she collected similar narratives from 21 other imprisoned Kurdish women politicians. She then compiled them into a book that became The Purple Color of Kurdish Politics, which was published in Turkey in 2018. In this essay collection, 22 Kurdish women tell their political experiences in serving as co-chairs, co-mayors, and members of the parliament in Turkey from 1990s to the moment of their arrest. So the book was imagined and written under the very difficult conditions of imprisonment, and most of these writers are still in prison. The English translation of The Purple Color of Kurdish Politics was published by Pluto Press recently in November 22, and the translation was collectively undertaken by a group of 26 volunteer translators and Janet Beale, who did the editing of the whole book and added her artwork to the book. She did sketches of the women politicians, and we added those sketches to the book. So very much like the original text, the translation itself is a product of collective feminist work, solidarity. And thanks to these acts of retelling, basically feminist lessons, political lessons of liberation and empowerment go beyond linguistic borders and reach the different feminist communities who are open to learning from other feminists around the world. So to me, translation and activism are inseparable from each other, and that affects my teaching, that affects my research. So it's all part of the same kind of whole for me. A lot of my students ask me, right, what do we do with women's studies? For example, why should I minor or major in women's and gender studies? And I always tell them this: women's and gender studies gives you a kind of a critical edge that no other field can do. This doesn't mean that other disciplines do not have critical thinking, frameworks. They do, but I think women's and gender studies gives students this kind of intersectionally informed, sometimes hopefully transnationally informed perspective that really helps you see the world and yourself and your relations with others from a different perspective. So obviously, whatever you do in your life, whatever employment path you pick, that will be part of that journey. So I always tell my students, saying that you should major or minor in women's studies, no matter what you study, because women's studies is relevant for all disciplines, and it will give you that critical foundation that will make you stand out among the crowd as well. And so I say, don't just be a biologist, be a feminist biologist. Don't just be a journalist, be a feminist journalist. Don't just be a teacher, be a feminist teacher. And that will make a much bigger impact in the world. The list is endless. So whatever you want to be a feminist that. So that your work also becomes part of social change. It's not just employment. That's what I would say. I would like to end this, I think, with an invitation, right? An invitation to read translation, which is unfortunately not a big part of our culture in the US, but I invite all of you to read other people's works, particularly other feminist works in translation, and be ethical, responsible readers when you encounter feminisms traveling from other parts of the world. Because unfortunately, we learn a lot of misconceptions about other feminists or women around the world. We have, kind of sometimes xenophobic ideas, sometimes Orientalist ideas about, women living in the Middle East, women living in, whatever these massive geographies are. We just kind of reduce women living there to one thing. So try to leave those misconceptions aside and truly engage with their feminisms and see what you can learn from them, because we have a lot to learn from each other. A lot of theory actually is produced in other parts of the world. A lot of wonderful activism is produced in other parts of the world. So we need to learn to hear each other more and not fall into these Orientalist, racist, xenophobic traps.